Gavin McKenna finished this season with 172 points in 77 games across the regular season, playoffs, and Memorial Cup. That is absurd. That is well over 2 points a game, and he was elite at every sense of the word, and he's still not eligible until the 2026 NHL draft. He is going to be the first overall pick that year. I think this season cemented that. Barring an absolute insane collapse next year, he'll be the first overall pick next or in 2026. There's a lot of question marks about him though, because we don't know if he's coming back to the CHL, coming back to Medicine Hat, or if he's going to go to the NCAA. There is a number of rumors about Michigan really going in on McKenna. You hear some of the numbers that have been offered. A guy like Michael Misa early on in this season got offered a $1 million NIL contract to play in the NCAA. I have a feeling Michigan will be looking at McKenna and offering something similar. That's going to be very hard to turn down, especially because he'll be making more in his draft season than he would with an NHL contract. So that'll be very interesting to see how that all sorts out and if he ends up staying with Medicine Hat or if he goes to Michigan. From a development standpoint, he probably should go to the NCAA. Again, he was absolutely dominant in the CHL this year. Probably nothing more he can do. Dominating isn't going to hurt him by any means, but if he goes to the NCAA and has a season similar to what Macklin Celebrini had a number of years ago, he'll probably come into the NHL with a bit more of a mature game, more used to playing against tougher, stronger opponents. And that's just the difference between the NCAA and junior hockey. The NCAA, you're playing against older opponents, right? And that's good experience for a guy like McKenna who will be stepping into the NHL for the 2026-2027 seasons. I personally would like to see him stay in Canada. I don't want to see the top draft eligible Canadian we have for 2026 leave for the NCAA next year, but that's more of just a biased personal opinion. For McKenna, it's probably the better pick, right? And that kind of leads us into our next discussion, and that's there's been a number of players over the last week or so that have committed from the CHL to go to the NCAA. And I know a lot of analysts have been discussing this is a much bigger exodus of players than we were expecting this early on in the new agreement with the NCAA, allowing CHL players to go. Keaton Verhoeff and Cole Reschny, both from the Victoria Royals, are leaving Victoria to go to North Dakota next year. Reschny, not necessarily much of a surprise. He was absolutely dominant in the CHL, especially in the back half of the season for the Royals in the WHL this year. Had a great run in the playoffs, was great at the World U18s. So that's not necessarily surprising. He's probably ready to take a step into the NCAA. Verhoeff is a little more surprising. He's a 2026 eligible defenseman. He is, he's a bigger guy, 6'4", and a pretty good two-way stud already as a draft -1 defenseman. Yeah, a little surprising. I would have thought Verhoff would be a guy that would maybe commit for 2026, 27. So North Dakota is going to be a team to watch next year, especially with Verhoff, a guy who most early drafts for 2026 expect him to go in the top 5. So another big one of my favorites from this year's draft class, Jackson Smith, a guy who I have just outside the top 10 and as the third best defenseman in the draft, committed to Penn State for next year. Smith is a 6'3", great skater, great offensive instincts, can get caught defensively every once in a while. He gets caught flat-footed and such, and that's a big issue with his game is just those small mental errors, but overall he's got a really high offensive ceiling, and going to the NCAA is probably the right play for him next year. It'll help him kind of hone in and mature his game a little bit before he gets into the NHL. Spence was another one just over the weekend that signed with Michigan. Then there's still rumors about guys like Michael Misa, Caleb Denway, and of course Gavin McKenna. A lot of teams, a lot of analysts, a lot of reporters are all kind of surprised about how many are already going with, that rule just getting made in like October of last year. But, the NIL plays a big part. The CHL is likely going to get younger because a lot of these guys that are 17, 18 years old, they can start making some money early that they won't make in the CHL. I do think the CHL is going to have to look long and hard at potentially paying their players. So they're technically amateurs, but they are essentially professional players considering the amount of games they play and the amount of money that they're bringing in for these junior teams. Now the NCAA has recognized that and is paying these players probably still less than what they're worth, but nevertheless, these players are going to make a lot more money in the NCAA. You look at Misa, who's offered a $1.2 million NIL deal. CHL is going to have to find a way to compete with that kind of money, and I don't know if they'll be able to do it. Like some of these teams are worth a lot. The Calgary Hitmen are estimated to be worth around 114 million, and they're the most valuable team in all of the CHL. So they have the money. They can probably offer, a decent amount of money to these players, and that might be what they have to start doing. But that's something that needs to come all the way from the top of the CHL, complete different policy changes and such. Now, one thing I want to talk about too when it comes to NIL is there's a lot of misinformation about it. So you see a lot when you talk about these players going the NIL route, going the NCAA. A lot of people mention the fact that they're going to be on student visas and that they can't make money then. And that's a bit of misinformation because they can make money. They have to follow a couple loopholes, right? There is some limits generally to off-campus money making. The exception really falls under passive income. So the main money that a lot of Canadian players can make in the states in the NCAA is through passive income such as royalties. So that's like selling jerseys, for example. They can make money off of that. Any kind of licensed apparel. So, more of a basketball example, but, court shoes for basketball players, they could make money off of the royalties, for example. And that's where a lot of these players will likely be making their money, whether it's jersey sales or just other kind of branded apparel. That is their main option. The other thing they can do is if they were to come back, into Canada and film some social media content, some activations and such, in the same way a lot of other NIL deals work, then they can make money off of that. So those are the two loopholes they can do. Like any company that's looking to go the NIL route with some of these athletes and make some money off of these NCAA players, they're gonna have it all mapped out, what the rules are and how they can make money off of them. So the point I'm trying to make is don't worry too much about them being Canadians and not being able to make money in the States because there's a few loopholes that they can absolutely exploit, right? Good example is Duke star Toby Fournier, who is a women's basketball player. She has become an ambassador for Roots, a Canadian activewear brand. And since Roots is a Canadian company and Toby can come into Canada to do her work for the company, it's within the work rules in terms of her visa and NIL endorsements, and she can make money that way. So that's just one example of how these athletes are given more opportunity to make NIL money through playing in the NCAA. And now I don't know off the top of my head what the rules are for the CHL, but maybe the CHL should start looking at allowing their athletes to take name, image, and likeness money if that's an opportunity. Maybe more Canadian brands would look to sponsor junior players. So something to keep an eye on for sure. The point being, really, the CHL is going to run into an issue here and start losing some big name players to the NCAA just because there's so much more money to go play in the NCAA.